We have Dr. Pamela Safisha Hill with us today with our new digital show, Courtyard Conversations with the UTA School of Social Work. And today we are going to talk about something that I know is near and dear to your heart, and that is commemorating and remembering as a country the lives that were lost in 1921 during the Tulsa Race Massacre. Dr. Hill, you spent the weekend, albeit a rainy weekend here in Dallas, Fort Worth, but you took the time to drive to Tulsa and to remember those many unnamed lives that were lost as a part of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And just to review for those students and individuals who may be unfamiliar with the 1921 massacre, this is an event that still today holds trauma in the lives of many African Americans, not just because of Tulsa, but because of the vast majority, because of the vast number of these kinds of events throughout the South and Southwest, and in some cases up the East Coast. So the Tulsa Race Massacre is a time in history where the most arguably affluent African American community in the United States, we're talking nearly 40 blocks of businesses, homes, churches, dry cleaners, 4 theaters, physicians' offices, all self-contained and able to sustain itself as a community within itself. And yet on one night, over 2 nights, in fact, May 31st through June 1, an angry mob decimates this entire community, randomly shooting men, women, and children, and ultimately destroying all but a building or 2 that remains today of what was referred to as the Greenwood District. Tell us what you experienced when you went back. How was that for you, understanding as a scholar yourself of African American studies? How did you feel going back to the Greenwood District to commemorate this 100th observance, 100th anniversary?
Thank you for inviting me. I am a native Oklahoman, and I lived in Tulsa for about 5 years towards the end of the 1980s. And like most people, I had never heard of this historical tragedy. I was at the Rudisill Library, which is on the north side of town, which is the black side of town. And it had a display. And I said, "What is this?" And so they began to educate me on this massacre. I began to ask around. One of my sororities, one of our sorority sisters shared with me that she was 7 years old when it happened. And she began to share some things with me that she remembered. Another lady, I was telling my mother about this. And my mother used to do hair, and the lady in her chair said, I remember that she said, I was 16, I ran all the way to Muskogee, my hometown, which is 50 miles east of Tulsa. And there is an organization called the African Ancestral Society, who for the past 25 years had been doing a memorial march for the survivors and the descendants, and bringing in people like Dr. James Small and Dr. Francis Cress Wellesley over the years, Dr. Leonard Jeffrey, to commemorate this. This is the first year that the city of Tulsa has ever been involved. And of course, they have denied it. It was interesting because what the city of Tulsa attempted to do is to make it a street festival. They are putting up buildings, monuments of nothingness, to attempt to substitute for not paying reparations. There are 3 known living survivors. Mm-hmm. Mother Fletcher, who is 107, Mother Randa, who is 106, and Mother Fletcher's little brother, who is affectionately called Uncle Red, who is 100 years old. So he was a child. He was just born. He was, I think, 8 months old. But of course, his big sister and her friend remember what happened. They talked about how they were in their bed sleep, and their parents came and said, "We have to hide. We have to leave," and how they could smell the smoke, how the sky was filled, and how they would hear these white men coming and shooting down people, going into Black folks' homes and taking things, and running people out of their own homes and shooting the men down. This is something, in fact, because I knew about it, I've always taught in my Black studies courses. The story is a man named Dick Rowland, who had attended Booker T. Washington High School. He was an athlete. He was a scholar. Had a job working as shiny shoes in a building downtown. Now, the street archers separated the Black district from the white. Remember, this was 1921. Black people were still being lynched. Okay. Dick Rowland had to go to the bathroom, and so he had to go to another building to take the elevator up. There was a white girl named Sarah Page, who was the operator of the elevator. The story is that he tripped and grabbed her arm to keep from falling, and she screamed, and he ran, because in 1921, if a white woman screamed, a Black man is going to run for his life, because again, a lot of Black people were being lynched. And he was arrested, taken to jail, and a white mob, heard about this, because the newspapers began to say, I think the heading was Negro Nab's girl. They alleged that he attempted to rape her. He was never charged. Okay, she never pressed charges. And there's another story that I heard from one of the survivors, who said that she was interested in him and he was not interested in her. And when she attempted to approach him, he turned her down. So that's another story that I heard. But so thousands of men had gathered at the jail because they were going to lynch him. The Black men heard about it, and about 75 Black men got their guns and went down to the jail and said, "Not today." One shot was fired. A Black man lay bleeding in the street. They will not allow the ambulance to come through, and this is when the massacre started. They Tulsa had referred to it as a race riot. It wasn't a race riot. It was a massacre. These white men were so jealous of this Black community that was thriving. They had banks and hospitals and hotels, you name it, they had it. They did not have to go to the white man for nothing. They had everything they needed. They were very successful, very successful, very successful. And so these white men were jealous. How dare these Negroes have all these things and we don't? So they went in, they began to set homes on fire. They began to go into these homes and steal stuff. And guess what? The war was over, so there were military planes. So some of them got into those planes and dropped bombs, destroying more than 36 blocks. The police / Ku Klux Klan began to randomly deputize other white men to give them permission to go and murder Black people. The ones that they did not kill, they rounded up and put them in holding cells. Other people ran for their lives. So this year, again, because it was the 100th anniversary, the city of Tulsa was forced to recognize it. Now, you may have heard that there was going to be this big event, nationally televised, Remember and Rise, with Stacey Abrams and John Lennon. Now,
John Legend.
Legend. Thank you. I'm still, but the Race Massacre Commission, one of the people that was sitting on this commission in name was the governor of Oklahoma and some of other folks. They raised $30 million. $30 million. Not 1 cent of that was going to the survivors. Not 1 cent that was going into the Greenwood district. The word is that when Stacey Abrams and John Legend realized this, they said, we're not coming. So this event was supposed to take place on Monday, June 1st. It was canceled on Friday evening, late Friday evening. They had already given out 6,000 tickets. Mm-hmm. People came in from all parts of the country for this event. So it's quite interesting because now, the other thing that was interesting, the city of Tulsa used the image of one of the survivors, Mother Randall, without her permission to promote their events. So she is suing them. If you saw the last Wednesday, I believe, the 3 living survivors and some other people testified to Congress. Mother Randall spoke about how the city has used her image without her permission. There were other politicians there, Maxine Waters, Hank Johnson, Sheila Jackson Lee, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, a number of prominent ministers, Jamal Bryant, number of celebrities, Hill
Harper.
So people came for this event. I met people there from as far as Delaware, West Virginia, California, Washington State, Minnesota, everywhere. People came from everywhere. And again, what the city attempted to do was make it into a street party, but the majority of the people who showed up knew why they were there. They knew it was a commemoration and not a celebration. Mm-hmm. People wanted to change the narrative so that, it'll be okay. They wanted to, they're building, in the process of building right now, the Greenwood History Center, which is like a 3-story building. They've been planting trees and they have the Path of Hope walkway and all these physical buildings, but no reparations. No more. It was amazing because, again, for those of us who knew that we were there to honor the ancestors, on Monday, there was a soil ceremony because you may know that they had found bodies, mass graves. And there was a ceremony where there were 3 things of dirt and there were like 5 jars. And the jars said unknown, May 31st, June 1st. And people were asked to pick up the dirt and put it in these jars and fill it up. Now, I was okay until one of the survivors put their soil in. It was very emotional for a lot of people. Dr. Tiffany Crutcher was also there, and her twin brother was murdered by Tulsa police.
Terrence Crusher.
Yes, mm-hmm. Yes, and it was very emotional. It was an honor to be there, to be able to see these 3 elders who talked about the nightmares that they still have as a result of this.
And I'm glad you touched on that, Dr. Hill, because there are a number of scholars who contend that there are lingering traumas. There is, of course, and you're probably aware, a growing base of knowledge that there is collective racial trauma that can linger as much as 100 years among, many, not just direct survivors, but also those that are connected to the survivors, and then the broader audience of African Americans who are watching on. So one of the things that you said was that you felt very emotional. Why is it so traumatizing 100 years later?
Because it's still happening. It's still happening. Something that was so ironic is that Wednesday, as I was packing things, I heard airplanes flying over my house. I hear them all the time. But Wednesday, when I heard airplanes, I got scared. I was scared. I was shaking. And I'm like, why am I shaking? Because I'm preparing to go to Historic District Greenwood where blood was shed. Mm-hmm. And I was just nervous. And at first I did not know why. It's like, why am I shaking? Why am I scared in my own house? Because I knew about those things, because I know and met people who lived through that. And one thing that is something that I think that as Black people, we have what I call ancestral memory. There are things that affect us that we might not can explain. For example, if you're driving out in the country, you're out in East Texas or Louisiana, and you pass by a field or you pass by a tree, sometimes you get an eerie feeling. Something happened there. Our ancestors, I believe, are reaching out to us. They're speaking to us through certain things. And when we understand that 100 years ago, white police, Klansmen, people who were just deputized, random people, were shooting down Black people, no one was ever charged. Everybody walked free. They benefited from what they did, and the descendants lost generational wealth.
When you say lost the generational wealth, you're talking about much of the property, the land, was never returned, or in many cases in the South, we know that because of taxes and things like this, when people so-called abandon land, then others can pick up and begin to pay taxes on that land, and the land automatically becomes theirs. So there is a loss from the original owner to the new owner who may not have outright purchased that land. So when you talk about the lack of generational wealth passed down, is that an example of what you're talking about? And are there other examples?
And it's even worse because these people had money in banks. They had insurance policies on their businesses. But if your house is burned down and you go to the people and say, well, here's my stuff, well, we need proof. My house is bombed. Oh, I'm sorry, we can't help you. So all these businesses had insurance. Okay. And some had it with white folks because, there may have not been any Black-owned insurance companies there. So they never got their money from if they had it in different banks. They never got their policies for their in insurance. And just think of the interest today. The other thing that was quite interesting is that you had all these major companies as sponsors for some of these events, partnering with the city. All these major companies, but nothing going back into Greenwood. In fact, today, there might be 3 Black-owned businesses on Greenwood. Others are owned by white folks. The Tulsa drillers have the land right there for their stadium. They're building these high-rise apartments and buildings that the people who live in the Greenwood district could not even afford. So it is no secret that historically people have always wanted land. And people have done things to get you off your land so that they can take it and profit from it. So this is the same thing that's going on today. And they want us to forget. Oh, that's not important. And if you pay attention, this thing with the critical race theory, this attack on truth and history is also being launched around this same time. Texas as well as in Oklahoma. What's interesting is that on Friday, when we had the ceremony of March and the survivors participated in this march, there's a school right there, Carver Middle School, and the children, they allow the children to participate and watch. And I'm filming. And one little boy says, "Put me on camera." I turn around, I said, "Okay, what do you want to say?" Little white boy, probably 7th grade, said, "Don't be racist." His friend next to him said, "I want to learn Black history because I think it's interesting." These are two little white. This is the big fear of, if we continue to teach the history and culture, these little boys are going to grow to be anti-racist, activists, leaders, and politicians. This goes back to seeing the fact that the last few summers, you saw a number of young white people out with signs reading Black Lives Matter, participating in the marches and the protests. Folks got in there, oh, we can't have that. So we need to go in and change this. And ironically, it's happening around the same time as the 100th commemoration of the Tulsa Massacre, where hundreds were murdered. Their homes were taken, bombed. They were ran out of town. And one reason why, people never talk about it, because of the fear. Imagine the ones who did not leave Tulsa, who were still there. They were terrified. There were children who grew up not knowing what their parents went through.
Maybe that's a part of the trauma, or the generational trauma.
Of course.
A fear of talking. And we know that often through counseling, what comes through is, or what is suggested, is that you talk to someone about these concerns that you may have, these feelings that you may have, these emotions that are coming up. And so would you say that that is still a part of the trauma that you see?
Of course it is. And we can't forget that when a mother is carrying a child, if the mother is traumatized, that will have an effect on the child she's carrying. Mm-hmm. We don't think about that. Well, why is this child like this? Well, something happened to mama and she hasn't talked about it, but it's so strong that when she was carrying her child, that it began to affect this child growing up. Mm-hmm. And we don't look at that deeply, because then we'll have to admit that something went wrong. And then the big question, well, how do we repair that? Oh, well, we're going to build this monument. No, because again, we lost generational wealth. And in fact, there were quite a few people from Tulsa who were there, who I found out are descendants as well. And I'm trying to find it, because I think that my grandmother on my father's side may have been from Tulsa, because her last name is a prominent name there. And I'm like, I just wonder, because we are so close to Tulsa. A lot of people fled Tulsa and came to Muskogee and started up businesses there.
And did not talk about the experiences that had happened.
Right. I mean, so again, you still did not know. And again, my mother was born in 1920. So it happened in her childhood, but she never heard about it. And again, there were people who would say that, well, in their 70s and 80s, their parents never talked about it. And so there are some people who did not find out until they were in their 70s that their parents had experienced this. Mm-hmm. So, and again, the R word that we're afraid to use, reparations.
And reparations has been a consistent demand and a consistent call. Still, there's some who would say, how do you calculate it? What does it look like? Is that a fair argument to bring up?
Of course it is. You pay attention to history, you will find that other groups were given reparations. America, if I'm not mistaken, the United States paid Japanese $20 million each family for something that happened in Germany. Okay. Native Americans have reparations because their land was stolen. And again, you don't hear these things. I used to work at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And one thing that I realized there is that education was free. There were hospitals built. There were things that were built for Native American people. When I was in graduate school, I remember I had a classmate and she was Native American. And she made a comment one time that she had to explain it to me. She said, I wish that I could go to the American Indian hospital and see American Indians instead of seeing white people all the time. I'm like, what? What happened? So this is how I knew about that. I'm like, really? So there are things that have been in place, but not everyone knows.
Right.
So
Particularly the extension of education, as long as you can prove your Native American heritage, you carry this card, and of course, that can be passed down too generationally.
And it is not just a check for everybody. Reparations comes in various forms. When people say, "Oh, we can't afford it," but we can get stimulus checks to. I mean, the discussion has been pushed aside, but I am so pleased that Sheila Jackson Lee talked about it in her speech, and that others are talking about it in their speeches. There's been a resistance to even study reparations, but it is on the lips of many people now. Of course, when Joe Biden was there Tuesday, he fell short of mentioning reparations. But I believe that for the first time in my life, I believe that we might actually see some form. There's been, for some spaces, I think in Louisiana, I want to say Bank of America did something, but it is possible. It is possible because, again, we found that a lot of companies participated in the slave trade, ensuring enslaved Africans, doing all of these things. So there's a list of companies that we've been able to point to and say, okay, these are companies that participated, that benefited. And, so overall, it was a very humbling experience. It was, again, it was very emotional. It was very interesting. There was also a Second Amendment march. And to me, it was a beautiful sight to see hundreds of Black men and women armed, legally armed. There were also members of the Brown Berets that came from Chicago and Denver who participated. And also, this is the same time that in the state of Texas, they're saying that anybody can get a gun. Well, I guess they forgot that Black and brown people also believe in the Second Amendment right. One interesting thing is that we also saw this push to suppress voters. And all of these things, again, happening around the same time. Very interesting dynamic because we're going to see this shift change. And this effort to deny Black people and brown people and poor people opportunities at the polls and to try to enforce these things, to try to control education. And it's very interesting because I think that, again, there's a shift, and it's a spiritual shift. I felt it while I was there. I felt that ground move a little bit as we were pouring libations for the ancestors and as we were doing the soil ceremony to commemorate on a place called Standpipe Hill, where the Black people, the Black soldiers went to try to defend their community, which is the top hill there as you go into North Tulsa, Greenwood. University has put up this big tower with OSU on it. And at the bottom of the hill, there's a little plaque that reads Standpipe Hill. I'm like, shouldn't it be the other way around? I mean, so you have people taking over and trying to change the narrative. If you didn't walk behind the hill and see that little plaque, you would not know that was Standpipe Hill. You would think, oh, this is OSU, Oklahoma State, oh. So trying to erase the history.
So what should happen next? You've mentioned a number of things. The recognition of what many might believe are sacred places, sacred ground. You've mentioned the reparations. And what do you hope to, you've mentioned legislation, congressional legislation. There is some legislation that is afoot actually in Oklahoma. And then remembrances as well. Where should the country begin the healing process for the Greenwood District, and particularly for the survivors?
The first thing that must be done, reparations. If they can afford to raise $30 million to build
private donors.
Yes. Well, but some also government. There were people, I saw a number of white people that had shirts, reparations for Greenwood. So there are people who are non-melanated people who believe in reparations, but there are people who believe in this. So the city of Tulsa needs to make financial amends first to the survivors, to the descendants. They need to invest in Greenwood, black, because again, it's a historic district, and you go and it's like, where are the Black-owned businesses? I counted three. It was hundreds, but now it's 3. And so the question is, if people want to go in, are Black people able to go in and develop businesses in a Black community? This is something we see often. Because, do they get the capital to do so? So again, the city of Tulsa has to make the amends first, and they must do it financially, and not by planting a tree and putting a plaque by it. That is disrespectful. The fear is that if it happens in Tulsa, would that mean that the descendants of those massacred through the Red Summer of 1919 will also get reparations? Does it mean that people of African descent whose ancestors were enslaved in this country, will they get reparations? That's the fear, because if it begins to change, then that economic power will make a strong impact. And people, that scares some folks. And of course, you will have Black folks all day long who will say, well, we already have reparations because we got the stimulus check. People have said that. And we have reparations because we have affirmative action. People have said that. No. We have to keep fighting. We have to keep speaking up. We have to keep pushing. We have to get our politicians to do the right thing and to talk about it and to submit bills and to push it and to vote on it. And we know that it's going to be a hard mission. But again, the fact that we're speaking about it now more than ever is important. The fact that you cannot hide the history of what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma 100 years ago. Because everybody knows. People across the world know. On the news every night, the documentaries are out there, and you cannot hide anymore. So we shall see what's going to happen with this. Again, we have to keep pushing it, and we have to pay attention to politics. We have to pay attention to what's going on in Congress, what's going on in the Capitol buildings in each state, because again, all these efforts are focused on trying to deny, particularly Black people, of human rights. Mm-hmm. And what happened to Greenwood District, those Black people in Tulsa 100 years ago, was a violation of human rights.
Dr. Hill, it's been so wonderful talking to you. We hope that you'll come back to our show. And so it's been a wonderful conversation with you. And I do want you to come back. Before we leave, we know that this month is a month to also recognize and remember elements of slavery, particularly here in Texas, that also for a long time were not acknowledged. So Juneteenth recognizes when the slaves in Texas heard that they were free. And these celebrations as well are becoming more prominent. Are you encouraged by the wider spreading embracing of the Juneteenth, not just the commemorations, but also the Juneteenth message of freedom?
Yes, definitely. And it's amazing because I used to live in Ohio, in Cincinnati, and this was 20 plus years ago, and they had a Juneteenth. I'm like, y'all know about Juneteenth here? And there's a big one in California and Oklahoma, all over, because, people from Texas, as they migrated out, they took their celebrations with them. And I remember my mother telling me, she said, well, oh yeah, we always celebrated Juneteenth. And she said that they would have a community gathering. They would play baseball and have food and have church services. And first, I'm trying to picture my mother playing baseball, but just the fact that Black communities, long before it was popular, celebrated not only Juneteenth, but Negro Achievement Week, that is now Black History Month, and did so without asking permission of anyone. So I'm encouraged that more people are learning about it. And again, in fact, I'll be speaking. I believe the date is June 17th. It is supposed to be on for Juneteenth. And I've actually, since I've been in Texas, I've been a speaker for Juneteenth at different events, and what is important is that we know the history. Mm-hmm. I've been to some events where they might have a Juneteenth pageant, and the question is never asked, well, what does Juneteenth mean to you? So I think that as we educate people, and people are very interested in knowing, because knowledge is power. And we can't be ashamed to tell the history, because we know that there are those who want to hide it and say, oh, it happened a long time ago, forget about it. We cannot forget about our history, because we would be dishonoring our ancestors. And that's really important that we understand. This is what I tell particularly young Black students on the shoulders of those who came before us, that we must always be honorable, that we must work hard and achieve what we can, and we must give back. We must each one teach one. And just because we get here, it is our duty to reach back and pull up as many as we can, and to make sure that we are a shining, positive example for those who are looking at us.
So we're going to look forward to your message on June 17th, and we may have you back for a special show. That's a show in and of itself, all by itself, to celebrate those achievements and to remember the past in that way. So we're very proud of you, Dr. Hill, for all that you do. We did post on our School of Social Work Facebook page and our other social media pages, and there were students who one after the other said, oh yeah, Dr. Hill, that's my teacher. So we're so happy with how you represent us and the knowledge that you bring to us, and not just in this area and in the space of the University of Texas at Arlington, but across the country. So thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Everyone, be safe and have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.